particular, expresses deep concern at instances of discrimination, intolerance, and extremism manifesting in the form of hate speech. Expresses deep concern at instances of violence fueled by hate speech, recognizes hate speech, among other concern dynamics, as a contributor to driving the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of conflict, encourages all relevant stakeholders to speak out against hate speech, and recognizes that efforts to address hate speech, intolerance, and extremism can contribute to the protection and promotion of human rights. This constitutes a solid recognition that hate speech is often at the core of the dynamics on which the resolution expresses concern, in which the resolution deplores and condemns, despite hate speech being underreported in situations under the agenda of the Security Council. So violence does not start when physical attacks are launched. Violence often starts with words. Words of hatred spread intolerance, divide societies, promote and endorse discrimination, and incitement to violence. So all UN agencies who have contributed to this briefing considered hate speech as the common thematic thread underpinning the content of this important resolution. So, Excellencies, around the world we continue to see the negative impact of hate speech. Hate speech can trigger violence and contribute to the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of conflict, often targeting the most vulnerable in society, including ethnic, religious, racial, and national minorities, at times intersected with other vulnerable groups such as women, refugees, and migrants. Hate speech reinforces discrimination, stigma, dehumanization, and marginalization. In situations of ongoing crisis or conflict, hate speech is especially dangerous as it can intensify existing tensions and vulnerabilities. Often coinciding with disinformation, hate speech can also entrench divisions and pose a direct threat to civilians in contexts that are already navigating a difficult road to peace. In the most serious situations, hate speech may also be an indicator of risk and potential trigger of serious crimes, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So, ladies and gentlemen, hate speech is not a new phenomenon. It has been employed to trigger violence, conflicts, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity throughout history. However, today, the widespread use of social media based on business models, which often incentivize divisive, misleading, hateful, and violent narratives, while limiting exposure to other sources of information that may counter such narratives, is allowing hate speech to be employed by anyone, reaching quicker distance audiences, and hence increasing the potential for offline harm. Minorities are especially targeted, and so are women, especially those in public spaces. In the UN, we remain committed to raise awareness about the dangers of hate speech and work to address and counter its impacts, drivers, and root causes. However, tackling hate speech should never be used to stifle freedom of expression. Blanket restrictions, bans, and internet shutdowns are not the solution and may violate human rights, including freedom of expression. They may also silence the actors working to stand up against hate speech, including civil society, human rights defenders, and journalists. The United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech provides a comprehensive framework for tackling hate speech in line with international human rights standards. It emphasizes a multifaceted approach to addressing hate speech, utilizing all the tools in our toolbox from dialogue and outreach, education and promoting social cohesion, non-discrimination, and peace. The UN strategy is being employed across the system, especially in the field, to support national actors, including member states, who have the primary responsibility in addressing hate speech. So, as the United Nations focal point on implementing and coordinating the Secretary General's UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, I lead a working group of principals comprising of relevant UN entities, departments, funds, funds and programs. I coordinate efforts to implement this strategy. Through my office, over 20 UN country teams and peace operations have been supported in developing their own context-specific action plans on tackling hate speech, working with national partners and implementing the UN strategy. Some member states have also begun developing and adopting their own national action plans on tackling hate speech. In partnership with the UN Working Group on Hate Speech, my office has also provided comprehensive policy and technical guidance on the wide-ranging tools available to tackle hate speech, including on the role of education, private sector, women, religious and traditional leaders, sports actors, and others. So the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech has also been a vehicle for engagement with tech and social media companies for them to do more to respond to hate speech online before it has the potential to have real-world consequences offline. Last year, my office issued a policy guidance with specific recommendations addressed to tech and social media companies. This is complemented by ongoing efforts under the Secretary General's Our Common Agendas Policy Brief 8 and the upcoming Global Compact on Digital Technologies. And as Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, I have also consistently raised concern about trends of hate speech through my statements and briefings, including to this body and to the Human Rights Council. So, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the Council's consideration of the issue of hate speech and incitement to violence, including through the adoption of Resolution 2686 in June 2023. Since its adoption, the Council has also addressed the issues in the resolutions in connection with the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Libya, Somalia, South Sudan, and the Middle East. Since the adoption of this resolution, various special political missions and peacekeeping operations have been monitoring hate speech, including gender-based hate speech, within the scope of their mandate. Based on such monitoring, many have taken actions to address such phenomenon around the world. So, for example, MONUSCO's efforts to monitor hate speech, racism, and acts of extremism span from monitoring hate speech and associated violations across the Democratic Republic of the Congo to developing tools to track allegations of human rights violations and utilizing this information for reporting, advocacy, and awareness-raising activities. And MONUSCO has conducted capacity-building sessions for state partners, civil society actors, community and religious leaders, and the media, emphasizing the importance of countering hate speech, especially during election periods. The mission also emphasizes advocacy and strategic partnerships with the National Human Rights Commission, other UN agencies, and international organizations. In the context of the intensified hostilities in Eastern DRC and the heightened risk of ethnically targeted hate speech, the Security Council has recognized the importance of leveraging the UN mission in the DRC to help prevent and address hate speech. MONUSCO also employs its good offices and technical expertise to support Congolese authorities and build the capacity of judicial bodies and other civil society actors. So MONUSCO has produced various multimedia products and conducted sensitization workshops and trainings involving youth, civil society, political parties, and public administration. The mission's Radio Okapi collaborates with an NGO to air a weekly program addressing hate speech through humorous theater sketches tailored to radio format, focusing on community conflict and political intolerance. The mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, also monitors and reports on hate speech and incitement to violence during the conflicts, advocating for accountability. And in recent months, UNMISS has established a working group on information integrity to proactively monitor, assess, and recommend prevention and response measures to misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and hate speech targeting the wider community, in addition to that specifically aimed at the mission. UNMISS is developing an internal strategy on monitoring human rights in the context of elections, which will provide guidance on monitoring and responding to hate speech based on the UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech. In Abyei, the United Nations Interim Security Force, UNISFA, employs diverse strategies to monitor misinformation and hate speech in an environment with limited mass media and internet penetration. This includes daily online media monitoring to identify hate speech on social media and equipping key community leaders with VHF radios for early warning. UNISFA also engages in regular offline monitoring through in-person community engagements and trains local media practitioners and influencers to support warning efforts. In collaboration with the Department of Peace Operations, the mission is establishing a working group to report, monitor, analyze, evaluate, and implement preventive and responsive action related to harmful information. The United Nations Peacekeeping Force in Cyprus, UNFICYP, addresses misinformation and disinformation on several communication priorities. These include tracking and responding to mis and disinformation in real time, promoting UNFICYP's mandate and achievements, conducting regular communications campaigns to highlight the negative impact of harmful information, and protecting the mission's reputation through strong relationships with the media. They also leverage political and communication support from UN headquarters and the diplomatic community as required. In Lebanon, the UN mission UNIFIL continues to address misinformation and disinformation in accordance with its strategy adopted in February 2023 and as requested by the Security Council. Amid the exchanges of fire across the Blue Line since October 2023, UNIFIL has actively responded to numerous media reports to correct inaccuracies regarding its mandate. It is crucial for host authorities to publicly clarify the mandate of UN entities, thereby ensuring the safety and security of UN personnel, including peacekeepers. Additionally, countering misinformation and disinformation requires consistent support from the international community. In the Horn of Africa, with the support of my office, OHCHR, and the Office of the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, coordinating with other UN and other non-UN entities, launched the United Nations Horn of Africa Strategy on Hate Speech in November 2023. The strategy strengthens the capacities of UN staff and national partners to monitor, analyze, and document hate speech. As part of his good office's work in the Great Lakes region, the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region has engaged countries in the region on the need to curb inflammatory, divisive rhetoric that contributes to the rising tensions between countries, notably between the DRC and Rwanda, and between Burundi and Rwanda. Working in close collaboration with SRSG for the DRC, as well as my office, Special Envoy Ixia has called on all stakeholders to urgently address hate speech and incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence that significantly harm peaceful coexistence of communities and states in the region. In Central Africa, UNOCA has been taking a lead in coordination with other UN entities to support the member states of the UN Standing Advisory Committee on Security Questions in Central Africa and the Economic Community of Central African States in developing a regional strategy and action plan to prevent and address hate speech and incitement to violence in the region. Furthermore, the mission has been providing tailored support to the countries in the region. In the lead-up to the general elections in Gabon on 26 August 2023, UNOCA, along with the Office of the Resident Coordinator, launched a campaign to support the efforts of authorities to curb the dissemination of prejudiced and xenophobic messages. In Equatorial Guinea, UNOCA has supported a project jointly implemented by the Office of the Resident Coordinator and the United Nations Development Programme to enhance the conflict resolution capacities of the youth. The training equipped youth to identify, manage, and resolve tensions in their communities, families, and workplaces, and promoted the meaningful participation of women in conflict resolution. In Libya, UNSMIL continues to support the crucial role of Libyan women in peace building and their full participation in political processes and decision-making as a part of efforts to overcome political obstacles for the holding of transparent and inclusive presidential and legislative elections. The mission works closely with media outlets and social media platforms to alert and counter hate speech in the context that women activists and civil society actors have been targets of incendiary rhetoric and hate speech. In the Middle East, UNSCO continued its quarterly reporting on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334, and through its strategic engagement and public messaging with local partners, UNSCO continued to raise awareness about the dangers of hate speech, its impact on peace and stability in the region, and the need to address its root causes. Moreover, UNSCO continued to amplify the voices of local CSOs that are working on building resilient societies in Palestine and Israel based on respect, dignity, and coexistence. Since October 2023, the Special Coordinator has conducted intensive engagements with all stakeholders, including in the region and internationally, to support efforts towards reaching a deal that will establish a ceasefire and secure the release of all hostages. And Special Coordinator Wennesland also continued to use his good offices to support de-escalation efforts across the OPT and in the region. In Iraq, UNAMI has been supporting the government's initiative to draft a national strategy to counter hate speech upon their request. UNAMI has also organized a dialogue on the role of the media in countering hate speech, focusing on a range of topics, including gender and minority perspectives on hate speech and social cohesion, as well as strengthening partnerships with media outlets and social media companies to address the issue of hate speech. In Yemen, UNMHA developed a communication strategy placing an impetus on tracking hate speech and countering mis- and disinformation. Through its monitoring, the mission has identified trends and conducted sentiment analysis by using digital technologies. The Office of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Myanmar has been closely monitoring hate speech and racism that negatively affects peace and security in the country. As the conflict in Rakhine State intensifies, both Rakhine and Rohingya communities caught between not only the front lines, but also the military's race card, playing on all prejudices as radical members of each community have been instrumentalized to fuel intercommunal tensions and violence. Ongoing deterioration of intercommunal relations in Rakhine is underlining the importance of early warning and prevention, and the UN continues to draw attention to the threats hate speech poses to the social fabric of communities in Myanmar. In both mission and non-mission settings, the Peace Building Fund has been providing targeted funding to UN teams in different countries to respond to hate speech as a trigger and amplifier of violence and grievances. For instance, in Mali, PPF has supported activities addressing narratives and hate speech linked with violent extremism, as and when conducive to terrorism, while also supporting youth bloggers and community discussions around hate speech and its effects. In Mauritania, PBF is supporting projects in addressing hate speech and promoting religious dialogue and social cohesion, through which a network of women religious guides and community leaders have been especially effective in fostering alternative discourse to extremism at the community level. Last year, the Peace Building Fund approved more than $9 million towards efforts on countering hate speech through 7 projects in Africa, Americas, and Europe. Mr. President, Excellencies, tackling hate speech is complex and requires dedicated attention and support. The efforts already implemented across the UN system are important steps that need to be further supported. This includes through dedicated funding. It also requires the political commitment and support of the Security Council. This is central to the implementation of Resolution 2686. So I encourage this Council to continue consideration of this topic, including by requesting more regular briefings on this topic by relevant UN entities, including my office as the United Nations Global Focal Point on Hate Speech and on implementing the Secretary General's UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech. I also encourage this Council to continue its engagement with tech and social media companies to emphasize their roles and responsibilities in tackling online hate speech, and to continue supporting the inclusion of women in peace and security agendas, including on issues related to countering hate speech against women. Finally, since member states have the primary role in tackling hate speech, I encourage member states to consider developing national action plans for countering hate speech. With my support as UN focal point on hate speech, such action plans should be rooted in human rights and protection of civilians and focus on addressing hate speech holistically from impact to root causes and drivers. The UN will continue to prioritize efforts to counter and address hate speech in line with the resolution of the Council and the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, for which, as I mentioned, I am the UN focal point. Coordinating the implementation of the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech globally requires enormous efforts and capacities. Achieving this ambitious objective demands significant investment in both resources and expertise. To ensure that my office implements this task successfully, I urge our member states to consider increasing their contributions through both the regular budget and voluntary channels. Let me conclude by sharing that just a few days from now, on 18th of June, we will be celebrating the 3rd International Day for Countering Hate Speech here at the United Nations headquarters, with an event that my office is organizing at the ECOSO Chamber in partnership with the Kingdom of Morocco on the importance of investing in the power and the voice of youth to counter hate speech. The voices of youth matter, and it is important to take them into account, especially when implementing actions aimed at preventing violence, conflict, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, because only when youth are included, prevention can be forward-looking and sustainable. I invite you all to join us in this important event, and thank you, Mr. President, for giving this opportunity to us to present. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Nderitu for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Special Advisor Nderitu, for your briefing. Colleagues, we were very pleased to co-pen this landmark resolution with the UAE when they were on the Security Council, and we're also pleased that the Arab League welcomed the resolution. Let me make 3 points. First, on the basis of the resolution, Resolution 2686 is underpinned by human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression, and the promotion of gender equality. These rights are interdependent, mutually reinforcing, and all play a role in promoting peace and security. As a Council, it's important that we acknowledge that respect for human rights is vital to our work in preventing and addressing conflict. Second, on the relevance of this resolution. In conflict situations, as we've seen, religious minorities too often face persecution and intolerance, as experienced by the Yazidis in Iraq and the Baha'i in Yemen. Religious intolerance and persecution fuels instability, impacting both conflict prevention and resolution. However, when freedom of religion or belief is respected and interreligious dialogue is promoted, we can build trust and understanding between communities, helping to secure sustainable peace. For example, the UK's Strengthening Peace and Resilience in Nigeria programme aims to increase the safety of 1.5 million citizens by supporting national efforts to tackle the root causes of intercommunal conflict in a manner that promotes tolerance and is sensitive to the religious identities of local communities. Third, on the role of women. President, we know that women's participation is crucial to sustainable peace, yet women face continued threats and violence. The Secretary-General's latest report on women, peace and security stated that between May 2021 and April 2022, 172 women human rights defenders were subjected to reprisals for engaging with the UN. This is unacceptable. I welcome the Special Advisor's reference to women, and we must all follow up on Resolution 2686's call on Member States to promote women's safe participation. Acknowledging risk of reprisals is a major barrier to women's engagement in political life. In conclusion, President, we are committed to defending freedom of religion and belief alongside freedom of expression and gender equality, to overcome the forces of division we face today that lead to the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of conflict. The international community must implement the ideals of this resolution, helping to promote and uphold all human rights. I thank you.
Representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Presidency of the Council for convening this meeting on the vital issue of promoting tolerance worldwide. We also thank Ms. Alice Nderitu, Special Advisor of the Secretary General on Prevention of Genocide, for sharing important insights and information. Mr. President, last year's adoption of Resolution 2686 marked a defining moment in the international community to address the insidious drivers of conflicts, including incitement of hatred, racism, xenophobia, gender discrimination, acts of extremism, and other forms of intolerant ideology as key drivers to conflict. This resolution represents a significant step towards promoting coexistence and addressing these critical issues on a global scale. Mozambique wholeheartedly supported these resolutions stemming from our unwavering commitment and belief in tolerance as the binding force that unites our multicultural, multi-ethnical, and multi-religious society. This belief is embodied in the slogan we adopted at the inception of our statehood, national unity, the foundation upon which Mozambique's statehood would build. We therefore advocate for and encourage relevant stakeholders to share their good practices in promoting tolerance, interreligious and intercultural dialogue, and peaceful coexistence. Mr. President, maintaining vigilance against intolerance remains a crucial responsibility for the international community. The implementation of Resolution 2686 goes hand in hand with strengthening institutions and upholding international human rights law, given the tensions that can arise from the need to safeguard individual freedoms and rights. In our interconnected world, where information spreads rapidly through social media, combating bigotry and fostering understanding are essential. Multilateralism, grounded in cooperation and collective action, serves as binding force that unites nations in addressing global challenges. Mozambique remains deeply concerned about the marginalization of women, cultural discrimination, and the stigmatization of fanatical views against women, including the lack of access to education. These issues can delay or undermine the global achievement of durable and sustainable peace, security, and reconciliation. Mr. President, we welcome the attention dedicated to increasing the diversity of UN peacekeeping personnel, including the visibility given to women. For the youth, and especially young women and girls, relatability is a potent agent of change and source of tolerance. In conclusion, Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to emphasize the continued relevance of Resolution 2686, a culture of peace, particularly in the face of many flashpoints and conflicts, where intolerance, hate speech, and the fear of the other is not only a potent driver, but also the very cause of conflict and wars. We need to enhance our essential values for a culture of peace. Therefore, we will continue to advocate harmony in diversity and pluralism as an asset for peace and security, as humanity has much more in common than what divides us. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Advisor Alice Wairimu Nderitu for her briefing. In June last year, as facilitated by UAE, the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2686, which recalled the original intent of the United Nations to practice tolerance and live in harmony, reaffirmed the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and called for the elimination of extremism, racism, and hate speech. Over the past year, these issues have remained very present in international relations and within many countries, and have become major triggers of instability and insecurity. China supports positive action by the international community in accordance with Resolution 2686 to make the world more inclusive, harmonious, and peaceful. First, we must advocate dialogue among civilizations. World civilization is based on diversity, and exchanges and mutual understanding among civilizations are a source of progress for humanity. The so-called civilizational superiority and clash of civilizations not only exacerbate the gap between nations and peoples, but also raise the risk of ideological and geopolitical confrontation. President Xi Jinping has put forward the Global Civilization Initiative, which advocates respecting the diversity of world civilizations, promoting the common values of all humanity, emphasizing heritage and innovation in civilization, and strengthening international humanistic exchanges and cooperation. Last week, the 78th session of the General Assembly adopted by consensus a resolution put forward by China establishing June the 10th each year as the International Day of Dialogue Among Civilizations. China calls on all countries, by way of implementing the resolution, to give full play to the important role of dialogue among civilizations to eliminate discrimination and prejudice, to promote people-to-people exchanges, and to inject positive energy in working together to tackle common challenges of humankind. Second, we must enhance mutual trust among countries. Multipolarity is the dominant trend in today's world. It is therefore natural for a country or a group of countries to desire a place that is properly theirs in the global multipolar system, and it should rightly be so. We believe that the world is big enough for all countries to grow together. At the same time, it is necessary to enhance mutual trust among countries, as it is an important prerequisite for maintaining stable international relations. We stand for equality of all countries, large or small, and against hegemony and power politics, as well as the monopolization of international affairs by a few countries. We must respect the political systems independently chosen by each country, support each country in taking a path of development that is in line with its own national conditions, and take care of the legitimate security concerns and interests of each country. Third, we must promote social inclusion. Social inclusion is not only a matter of individual rights and interests, but can also affect international relations through its spillover effect. Nowadays, in some countries, the problems of social fault lines and the political polarization are growing, which not only affect their own stability and development, but also lead to an increasingly conservative and populist foreign policy, thus increasing instability and uncertainty in the international environment. The countries concerned should have a deep self-inspection, step up to their historical responsibilities, adhere to the right ideas and values, and forge social consensus, rather than abandon themselves to the trend of populism. While safeguarding freedom of expression in accordance with the law, all countries should make joint efforts to combat disinformation and hate speech in accordance with the law, so as to minimize the negative impact of such speech in order to foster a cohesive and inclusive social environment. Fourth, we must promote common development. Allowing countries to share the fruits of development is what an all-inclusive international order is all about, and a fundamental path to realizing lasting peace. At present, the development gap between the North and the South continues to widen, and the 2030 agenda is at the risk of falling off track. We call for the maintenance of a free and open international economic and trade environment and respect for the legitimate right to development of the Global South. Developed countries should effectively implement their commitments and increase their financial, technological, and capacity building support for the developing countries. It is indeed worrying that some developed countries, in pursuit of their monopolistic advantages and in violation of the principle of the market economy, have continued to adopt protectionist policies and even unilateral economic coercion, which have disrupted the global industrial and supply chains, impeded the healthy development of the world economy, and damaged the interests of all countries. We hope that the countries concerned will echo the trend of our times to practice openness and win-win cooperation so as to enlarge the cake of cooperation and realize common prosperity. President, humanity is a community of solidarity and common future, and the choices we make right now have a bearing on the future of mankind. China calls on all countries in the world to stand on the right side of history, strengthen communication and dialogue, and practice tolerance and forgiveness so as to so as to achieve common development, common security, and common progress through solidarity and cooperation. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We listened with interest to the informative briefing delivered by Madam Nderitu. Exactly 1 year, the Council adopted Resolution 2686, and we wish to thank the UAE for this constructive initiative, which we fully support. The resolution, for the first time, drew the Security Council's attention to the importance of the advancement of the ideals of fraternity based on tolerance, equality, coexistence, dialogue, pluralistic traditions, mutual respect, and a diversity of religions and persuasions, sovereignty of states, and the upholding of the ideals of fraternity at the global level. The resolution instructed the Security Council to pay serious attention to countering discrimination, intolerance, and extremism, which assume the form of hate speech and violence, including on the basis of ethnicity and religion. Practical measures need to be undertaken to counter the discrimination against individuals affiliated with religious communities, specifically when it comes to instances linked to Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Christianophobia, and other forms of intolerance. As is known, the ideas of racial superiority spawned a practice of apartheid, the policy of apartheid, colonialist exploitations, fascism, and Nazism. All of these ideologies and practices have a single root. They resulted in the most horrific crimes of the history of humankind, whose victims were millions of people in all continents. In order to surmount this legacy, this past, the United Nations organization was established. However, the idea of racial superiority and exceptionalism persist, and they are continuously assuming new forms. The modern-day world has been flooded with racist and xenophobic rhetoric. Nazism is being revived. There are ubiquitous manifestations of intolerance on religious, ethnic, or linguistic grounds. Furthermore, some states fail to duly suppress such manifestations, and other states are simply incorporating them as a part of their policies. We have observed how, under the banner of freedom of expression, in certain countries which proclaim themselves to be beacons of democracy, the Quran is publicly burned. We have observed how in Europe there are marches of neo-Nazis and Nazi henchmen, and the monuments to those who vanquished Nazism are being defiled. All of these are grave challenges of the present day, and one cannot stand by indifferent to them. We cannot tolerate the fact that since 2014 in the Ukraine there has been a policy carried out to eradicate everything Russian. There is a progressive ban being introduced on the use of the Russian language, which is the mother tongue for at the minimum 40% of the country's population. The Russian language is being expelled and wiped out from education, media outlets, public life. Monuments to Russian writers such as Alexander Pushkin are being taken down. In 2017, a law on education was adopted. This is a part of the discriminatory policy in the Ukraine. And yet another element of that same policy was a law adopted literally yesterday. This is a law on preschool education. In November of 2023, in the Ukraine, a law was adopted on national minorities. This is designed to uphold their rights, which explicitly states that this law will not apply to the Russian language. We cannot reconcile ourselves to the fact that individuals defending the rights of the Russian language population, or simply standing up for dialogue with and peace with Russia in the Ukraine, are simply being murdered on the streets. And this is what happened with the journalist Ales Buzinoy in 2015, or they simply disappear. This is what happened with the Ukrainian human rights defender Yelena Berezhna. She was arrested on the 16th of March, 2022. She was brought to the detention center of the Galaseevsk region in Kiev. There's been no trace of her since then. Nobody knows of her whereabouts or her fate. If she is alive, then most likely she is located in the torture chambers of the Ukrainian security forces. We requested that the Secretary General provide assistance, and once again we asked him to deliver assistance in determining the fate of Yelena Berezhna. President, Resolution 2868 recognizes the significance of intercultural and interreligious dialogue and its valuable contribution to the reinforcement of social cohesion and peace. Fairly regards intercultural and interreligious dialogue as an important instrument in efforts to establish peace. In the halls of this chamber, we repeatedly drew attention to the tragedy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which today, before our very eyes, is unfolding in the Ukraine. Today, right now, in the Ukraine, there are measures being consistently adopted at the legislative, at the law enforcement levels, including media-related measures, and the purpose is to eradicate canonical Orthodoxy in Ukraine. This is the faith faith that is practiced by the largest number of people on the territory of that country. Clergy are subjected to a large-scale campaign of disinformation to discredit its priests in the eyes of parishioners. The image of henchmen of the enemy is being established through this every day from the UAF, as well as journalists and information space spews mendacious allegations with hate speech against saboteur priests, as they call it. Kiev is giving carte blanche in this way to radicals of all stripes to perpetrate violence and lawlessness in order to cleanse the religious landscape of the country. And the results here are clear. Clergy is beaten, arrested. The internet has been flooded with images and videos of these events. Since 2019, churches of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have been seized, and there's forced illegal, juridical liquidation of their communities in the guise of putative voluntary conversions to other religious dominations. An egregious example of this practice is the expulsion of monks from the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, which is the ancient monastery, a symbol of canonical orthodoxy. Orthodox churches in Ukraine are simply being destroyed, as was the case on the 17th of May, just 1 month ago, with the Vladimir Olginsk Church of the Desetina Murskova Monastery, which was erected by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on the place of the first in Rusi, the first stone church. This was quite simply razed to the ground. In this connection, we wish to recall the fact that Resolution 2686 emphatically, decisively condemns all acts of violence against individuals on the basis of their religion or conviction or such actions against their places of worship, as well as condemns any attacks on their religious sites, objects, and holy sites or on their territory in violation of law, including the Charter of the United Nations. President, by way of conclusion, we wish to note that Resolution 2686 is also designed to generate momentum for the development of national strategies to combat intolerance and extremism, which create fertile ground for terrorism, a decisive role in combating the radicalization of the population and extremism in all of its manifestations, as well as to counter its ideology. A decisive role here is borne by states and their competent bodies. However, these efforts need to also bring in religious communities, academia, educational institutions, media outlets, as well as private sector representatives. We urge specialized UN bodies to tackle this important objective head-on. At the same time, there's a need to recall that in the implementation of any international initiatives in anti-extremism and counter-terrorism, there is a need to take into account traditional, historical, socio-cultural, and religious context. One cannot cast aside the fact that radical groups and their ideas are at times unfortunately exploited by certain political forces, including as a tool to exert influence on the governments of other states with the aim of destabilizing them. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me extend my thanks to Mrs. Nderitu for her remarks. Tolerance. Tolerance, what a good sounding word in this chamber, where we discuss on a daily basis about war, conflicts, crises, massacres, and even genocide. Yes, genocides in the 21st century. Tolerance and most broadly the culture of peace as concept and ideals are deeply challenged nowadays in this current global context. Therefore, there is a need to confer a concrete sense to the endeavor toward tolerance beyond what is contained in the Resolution 2686. And in this regard, I wish to point out the following. First, considering the principle of tolerance in the Council agenda has to go in line with the different calls made by the same Council for the respect of international law and the principles of the UN Charter. In the current context of international relations, tolerance cannot be materialized while we are in front of a barbaric aggression being perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces against innocent civilians, including women, including girls and children in Gaza and in the occupied Palestinian territories. Tolerance cannot be achieved since one of its most blatant illustrations is rejected by the Israeli aggressors, which is the two-state solution. Those who shredded the UN Charter, those who are questioning the noble role of the UN, are putting the principle of tolerance in danger. In a context where we still have colonized territories around the globe, tolerance would naturally means that the right of self-determination has to be granted to those under oppression, to those who are being forcibly displaced and silenced in Palestine, in Western Sahara, and elsewhere. Here, I wish to recall the declaration and the program of action on culture of peace adopted in 1099, which establishes that a culture of peace is integrally linked to, and I quote, realizing fully the right of all peoples, including those living under colonial and other form of alien domination or foreign occupation, to self-determination enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. End of quote. Observing the principles of international law without selectivities and one-sided anger would lay the foundation for tolerance to be materialized. Second, Mr. President, there is a need to build more bridges between the Security Council and the General Assembly on different topics, such as tolerance and culture of peace. There are multiple products adopted by the General Assembly that need to be looked at closely for meaningful implementation to strengthen the concept of tolerance. My country, Algeria, proudly tabled the Resolution 72-130 that was adopted in December 2017, declaring 16th of May as the International Day of living together in peace. I seize this occasion to reiterate the call contained in this resolution on all member states, organization of the UN system, and other international and regional organizations, as well as civil society, including NGOs and the individuals, to observe the International Day of Living Together in Peace. In the spirit of this resolution, Algeria condemns any discrimination, any intolerance, and any extremism based on race, ethnicity, religion, or belief. In this vein, the Resolution 78-264, adopted by the General Assembly last March on the fight against Islamophobia, represents an important achievement that needs to be sustained. Algeria was part of the core group that negotiated the resolution on behalf of the OIC group and reiterates its commitment to maintain the momentum created through this milestone resolution. Third, Mr. President, tolerance has to be inserted in the prevention and most broadly the peace-building architecture as a central component to contribute concretely to long-term stabilization efforts. As member of the Peace-Building Commission, Algeria fully supports the mandate of this body to strengthen the coordination between all relevant actors of international community, particularly the regional organization, in promoting the principle of tolerance. Observing and respecting this principle has to go in line with the nature, tradition, and belief of each community and society. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President, and I also thank Special Advisor Nderitu for her briefing. This meeting takes place in a global context where intolerance, hate speech, and discrimination are on the rise, offline and online. This undermines social cohesion and can lead to tensions and violence. The genocides we have witnessed since World War II are haunting reminders of the catastrophic consequences of incitement to violence, hate speech, and intolerance for international peace and security. Respect for international law, human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law remain at the core of this Council's work. All Member States have the responsibility to protect and uphold the full spectrum of human rights for all, including persons of diverse ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and members of marginalized groups. The Security Council must condemn, unequivocally, all forms of violence, discrimination, and hate speech, including homophobia and transphobia. International human rights law provides a robust framework for protecting freedom of expression and religion in the context of peace and security. Every individual has the right to choose their religion, change it, or have no religion at all, and to practice their beliefs publicly and or privately. Yet, on a daily basis, we see religious minorities being repeatedly targeted, particularly during armed conflict. Religious communities and leaders also have a responsibility to reject hate speech, and we commend the peacemaking role played by some religious leaders and organizations in this regard. Freedom of religion or belief is inseparable from freedom of expression, which should only be limited by the boundaries strictly defined by international law. We are deeply concerned by the rising instances of harassment, coercion, and reprisals including by state and non-state actors, against human rights defenders and others exercising their right to free speech. On this day, we also reaffirm the essential role of civil society in preserving peace. The private sector, in particular tech companies, have a responsibility to comply with human rights obligations and effectively handle disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. We deplored the misuse of broadly defined extremism laws to target women human rights defenders, journalists, and political opposition. Further, we are deeply concerned by the impact of discriminatory laws and gender-based enforcement and application of existing laws and structural gender inequalities. Advancing gender equality and ensuring the full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation and leadership of diverse women in all efforts to build peace and prevent conflicts are goals unto themselves. They must never be reduced to counterterrorism tactics, which can negatively impact women and women's human rights organizations. This is why gender-responsive approaches are essential for responding to the potentially harmful impacts of counterterrorism measures on women and girls, and to strengthen prevention and respect for human rights. The role of this Council is to work for the maintenance of international peace and security. Human rights are the bedrock of peace. It is therefore incumbent on us to guarantee these rights for all persons in all their diversity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci.
Thank you, President. I thank the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, Wairimu Nderitu, for her presentation. Hate speech, which promote or justify hatred, violence or discrimination, for whatever reason, is unacceptable and therefore prohibited under international law. Tolerance is the subject of the resolution adopted a year ago and mandated the oral report we've heard today. It is an essential value to which we are all attached. It is indispensable for life in society, fraternity between individuals, and respect for all human beings. Tolerance must be pitted against hatred and hate speech, discrimination and violence. It cannot be used to another's advantage. Tolerance applies to all and in all circumstances. Respect for international law, and particularly human rights, fundamental freedoms and the rule of law, is a sine qua non for lasting peace. The rights of women, children, those from minorities, like those of any individual under international humanitarian law and international human rights law, must be fully upheld. All discrimination, all forms of incitement to violence or hatred must be condemned. This is what tolerance means. This Council must, more than ever, as part of its mandate, focus on upholding the Charter of the United Nations, international law and all conventions guaranteeing human rights by seeking to act in a specific operational way to ensure the maintenance of international peace and security. Against this backdrop, we must avoid a selective approach, given that human rights are universal, including the freedom of expression, the defence of human rights, the rights of women and the rights of LGBT+ people. The freedom of religion or belief is and a necessary protection of the right to freedom of expression is a freedom whose only limits are those defined by international law, and these are all indissociable. Many religious leaders and religious organizations play a pacifying role which must be commended, and they promote a spirit of fraternity, tolerance and cohesion. But we must condemn all discourse which stoke hatred and violence. Dispute resolution is achieved through political solutions with a federating role. Civil society and human rights defenders have an essential role to play to preserve peace. Women, men, young people, believers and non-believers all contribute to reconciliation and to peace. In this regard, France recalls its full support to the Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security agendas. President, the role of this Council is to assume the principal responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. Respect for international law is the essential and primary condition for this. It must guide us in tangible work that we will do crisis by crisis, region by region, so as to design political solutions to advance towards crisis resolution and peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, Ms. Wairimu Nderitu, for her presentation. As this Council struggles to find solutions to the complexities of today's growing number of conflicts and its drivers, one thing seems clear. Mutual understanding and respect are the bedrock for promoting tolerance and building peaceful, inclusive, and resilient societies. In doing so, the role of civil society is indispensable. Investing in children and youth will lay the foundation for a more tolerant and peaceful future societies. Allow me to make 3 points in this regard. First, past lessons teach us that widespread, gross, and systematic human rights violations and abuses are often indicators of a risk of violence and conflict. The Security Council should pay close attention to these processes and respond to them in a timely and appropriate manner. Prevention is key. Second, only inclusive societies grounded in social cohesion and embracing diversity can promote tolerance and build lasting peace. The role of women is key in this respect. As builders of peace and social cohesion, women are indispensable partners in preventing and resolving conflicts. Their full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation must be at the heart of all peace and security-related activities. Societies that empower women are more peaceful, and when women are included, peace is more sustainable. Security Council Resolution 1325, with succeeding resolutions, set up a strong normative framework to increase the participation of women and incorporate gender perspectives in all peace and security efforts of the UN, and we call for its full implementation. Mr. President, as my third and final and my last point, I would like to use this opportunity to stress the importance of addressing human rights in all UN fora. There should be no doubt that human rights belong also in the Security Council, as an early warning mechanism, as a part of preventive action, or in the context of protection of civilians, to name just a few. As the latest Secretary General's report on protection of civilians in armed conflict points out, strengthening compliance with international human rights law is central to the protection of civilians agenda. Therefore, we fully support the inclusion of human rights considerations in the work of the Security Council. Full and non-selective adherence to international human rights law in this respect is essential. Mr. President, the mutually reinforcing relationship between peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights is clear, and has also been recognized by this Council. The UN human rights system provides a collective toolbox for a better understanding and more accurate assessment of the security situations on the ground. It can thus provide indispensable support to countries and the Security Council in their conflict prevention efforts and in building sustainable peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to the Republic of Korea for organizing this session. And thank you, Ms. Nderitu, for your comprehensive briefing. As Resolution 2686 recognizes, hate speech, racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, related forms of intolerance, and gender discrimination can contribute to driving the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of conflict. States must respect and vigorously protect international law, including the UN Charter and human rights. To that end, I'd like to make 4 points. First, when we promote freedom of religion or belief, we also must promote freedoms of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and other human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights affirms this same interdependence. Fundamental freedoms, including freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression, are also vital to stable, secure societies. When each person is respected, regardless of their beliefs, and allowed to express them, they are more empowered to reach their full potential, which in turn can lift up communities and societies. In that regard, we hope the international community, including members of this Council, will work together in solidarity towards a world where no one suffers discrimination or persecution on account of what they believe or don't believe. The United States will continue to stand with and support brave advocates for the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This includes in countries where their rights are under attack, both publicly and directly in our engagement with government officials. Second, for years, the UN has appropriately focused on addressing violent extremism, including in the Secretary General's Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism and existing commitments member states have made to prevent and counter violent extremism. To that end, Resolution 2686 does not grant license to states to repress dissenting views under the pretext of, quote, countering extremism, unquote, or maintaining peace or societal harmony. Third, Resolution 2686 reaffirms the vital role of women's leadership in prevention and resolution of conflict and their contributions to preventing the spread of intolerance and hatred. The full, equal, and meaningful participation of women at all stages of peace-building, security, and decision-making is essential to forging lasting solutions to challenges in areas of conflict and crises and achieving sustainable global peace and security. Finally, the United States stands with like-minded members of this Council in committing to ensure Resolution 2686 will not be misused to justify repression of human rights defenders, women, youth, LGBTQI+ persons, or any violations or abuses of human rights. Together, let us strive for a world where all individuals can realize and express their full potential with respect for their human dignity, irrespective of their identity, religion, or belief. Only through respecting human rights can we truly promote tolerance. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Advisor Nderitu for her briefing on the implementation of Resolution 2686 in the context of situations on the Council's agenda. Guyana views Resolution 2686 as a significant contribution to the maintenance of international peace and security, as it provides another framework for promoting respect, understanding, inclusion, and tolerance. These elements are essential for conflict prevention, resolution, reconciliation, reconstruction, and peace building, and thus are important tenets for advancing the human rights of all individuals, including their right to live in peace and dignity. The Council made a useful stride by adopting a resolution on tolerance and can go even further by being a beacon of tolerance in a world where its deficit is growing. Mr. President, we are increasingly witnessing how intolerance can fuel conflict, particularly when it manifests as misinformation and disinformation, violent extremism, hate speech, and suppression of the freedom of expression. Efforts must continue to be exerted from the local to the global level to address intolerance in all its forms and to promote respect and understanding. In this context, it would be extremely useful for the Security Council to mainstream responses to intolerance as it executes its mandate for the maintenance of international peace and security. Resolution 2686 offers an important pathway in this respect. Guyana is particularly concerned about how intolerance is disproportionately impacting women and girls in conflict situations when it intersects with the gendered dimensions of conflict. We emphasize the importance of also viewing intolerance through a gender lens in order to capture and address any gaps that may be detrimental to the well-being of women and girls. Mr. President, Guyana's experience as a pluralistic society that has moved from tolerance to harmony is one from which several positives may be drawn that are applicable to the global context. By way of background, Guyana is comprised of 6 ethnic groups, and the 3 major religions practiced are Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. Our peoples have managed to use our diversity as a point of unity, creating a culturally rich and harmonious tapestry interwoven with understanding, respect, and acceptance. This state of harmony has been built through deliberate strategies for promoting interfaith harmony, respect for diversity, and good relations among Guyanese. These strategies have a strong constitutional basis. Our experience has taught us that tolerance is really the minimum that could be achieved and that harmony should be the end goal that we aspire to. Guyana therefore proffers 3 points for consideration to further strengthen implementation of Resolution 2686. First, national and international stakeholders, including governments, must cultivate a strong culture of dialogue as an antidote to intolerance. It is through dialogue that understanding is achieved and differences can be resolved. The rising incidence of hate speech around the world is concerning, and the proliferation of information and communication technologies only exacerbates the problem. As the Secretary General himself has said, hate speech is an alarm bell. The louder it rings, the greater the threat of genocide. We must collectively do everything possible to counter this tide and promote dialogue. Second, we must continuously promote the responsible use of information and communication technologies in ways that both uphold individuals' right to freedom of expression and reinforce their responsibility not to harm others with what is said. Third, there must be accountability for acts of intolerance, including in conflict situations, so that a culture of impunity is not created around such acts. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by expressing Guyana's commitment and support for addressing all issues that have implications for international peace and security. While some issues may not be in the conventional domain of the Council's work, it is nonetheless imperative that we continue to broaden our horizons to treat with them in the context of prevention and in the interest of peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I wish to thank Alice Wairimu Nderitu, Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, for her statement. Switzerland wishes to take this opportunity to address a key condition for conflict prevention and peace building, namely the respect and fulfillment of human rights, which include, inter alia, non-discrimination, freedom of expression, as well as freedom of thought, of conscience, and of religion. Social cohesion is rooted in the cohabitation of opinions, convictions, and beliefs. Tolerance is the cement of any inclusive society. Conversely, intolerance, discrimination, incitement to hatred, and violent extremism can divide or even sever social ties. The call for tolerance is therefore a call to counter discrimination in all of its forms and to respect the dignity of every human being. This call is rooted in a universal legal framework. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings, quote, are born free and equal in dignity and rights, unquote. From this provision emanates the prohibition of discrimination, which is enshrined in several international conventions. President, human rights are a sine qua non for building a lasting peace. They constitute our bulwark against the dehumanization, inequality, and injustice that often lie at the heart of violent conflict. Therefore, it is hardly surprising that armed conflicts are spreading around the world at a very time when human rights are losing ground. Impunity for human rights is a major risk to peace and security. A recent study by the Peacebuilding Fund demonstrates yet again, on the basis of concrete cases in 45 countries, that human rights and peace building are mutually catalyzing. The study confirms that the attention focused on human rights helps to identify and resolve disputes before they erupt into violence, to tackle root causes, and to remedy structural inequalities. It also shows that promoting women's rights and women's socioeconomic needs is a potent lever for peace, and that the empowerment of women facilitates access to justice for victims of gender-based violence. In this regard, the study demonstrates that combating gender-based hate speech is essential to promoting women's participation. According to the study, hate speech in general can be a precursor to spikes in violence and large-scale human rights violations. President, Switzerland strongly condemns all forms of hate speech. In the fight against this phenomenon, respect for human rights, in particular freedom of expression, must be guaranteed. All voices, even the most critical ones, must be able to be expressed. Freedom of expression, like freedom of religion and belief, fosters open and honest debate, which is the cornerstone of any pluralistic, inclusive, and peaceful society. They create a climate of trust, which is key for conflict prevention. In the same vein, tolerance and respect for the dignity of all human beings and the protection of minorities are essential if such a coexistence is to be achieved. As the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, affirmed before the Security Council in May of 2023, quote, "Full compliance with human rights is the best antidote to inequalities, unaddressed grievances, and exclusion," unquote. To act for human rights is to act for peace. So let us act by putting an end to all forms of discrimination, by guaranteeing women's participation in decision-making, and above all, by placing human rights at the heart of conflict prevention and peace building. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this briefing, and I also thank Ms. Alice Wairimu Nderitu, Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, for our valuable briefing. Sierra Leone welcomes the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2686, which recognized inter alia that hate speech, racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerance can contribute to driving the outbreak, escalation, and recurrence of conflict. This undermines initiatives to address root causes of conflict and prevent and resolve conflict, as well as reconciliation, reconstruction, and peace-building efforts. The importance of Resolution 2686 cannot be overemphasized. This resolution provides more inclusive and wider context on how to deal with the spectrum of drivers of violence, including cultural forms such as hate speech, racism, and intolerance. Sierra Leone will continue to fully support and advocate for the full implementation of this resolution because it seeks to promote tolerance and peaceful coexistence through dialogue and inclusivity. In this vein, we equally commend the Council's resolve to address hate speech, racism, and all forms of extremism with threats to international peace and security. Through the intents and purposes of 2686, we need to strengthen our collective efforts to prevent and combat racist doctrines and practices that remain a deep-rooted problem in our societies. We must come together in our resolve to galvanize all efforts aimed at the promotion of understanding between races, as well as taking actions that can make the world equal, fairer, and just for everyone. However, in recent times, divisive and dangerous ideologies are delivered through the global megaphone of social media. the vile messages remain all too familiar. Racism, misogyny, lies, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, stigmatization, discrimination, and the outright denial or even glorification of past genocides. The global community must stand as one against this torrent of hate speech and denounce it wherever it's found. We must stand together in a renewed global push to ratify and fully implement the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, while strengthening prevention mechanisms, educating new generations about past genocides, and countering the mis- and disinformation that fuels hate speech and genocidal intent and actions that are happening today. The universal principles of tolerance and peaceful coexistence, human rights, and gender equality must be respected and implemented. In 2001, member states, through the adoption of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, DDPA, by consensus, agreed to pursue justice, development, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, and fundamental freedoms for all. They committed themselves collectively and individually to implement the DDPA roadmap, which illustrates how the international community will follow on these commitments to prevent the future occurrences of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and to accelerate momentum to make the fight against this scourge a reality. We are pleased with member states that have, since the adoption of the DDPA, that have pushed through landmark legislative and administrative measures to effectively combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance on any basis. More importantly, we commend member states that appreciate and respect knowledge of people of African descent, including by recognizing and promoting their culture, heritage, and their contributions to development in respective economies globally. We should never forget nor cease to denounce all vestiges of racism and any other related intolerance. Structural racism and discrimination can and must be dismantled. We must show stronger political will, take concrete actions, and accelerate actions to tackle racial injustice and inequality. We must also speak out against hate speech, harassment, both online and offline. We have the responsibility to raise awareness about the impact of these entrenched menaces on our values and common agenda. If we combine our concerted and sustained efforts, we could achieve a shared future based on our common humanity. In this vein, we as member states of the United Nations have a responsibility to engage, demonstrate maximum solidarity to tackle poverty and exclusion, invest in education, rebuild trust and social cohesion in line with global development aspirations of leaving no one behind. Mr. President, let me close by highlighting the particular harsh reality at this present time for women's rights and for their quality of life generally. In so many of the world's major conflicts, women and girls, including children, are the most affected and their rights trampled upon. At the current pace, it will still take a very long time to achieve equality under the law for all. On our part, in Sierra Leone, there is evidence that the Women, Peace and Security resolutions are not just an abstraction. When these resolutions recognize women's enormous contribution for peace and the devastating effects of women's exclusion and marginalization, action have been taken over time. Accordingly, we are compelled by our experience to advocate strongly for the protection of women, girls, and children generally, and seek concrete actions and aspire for a more peaceful and prosperous future for all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Ms. Nderitu for her briefings. It has been a year since the Council adopted a resolution on tolerance and international peace and security. Yet, the current state of the world continues to be unbearable for many. We are witnessing the highest number of conflicts since World War II, with a quarter of the world population living in amidst these crises. Grievances ignite conflicts, which in turn generate more grievances. Often, this arises not only from genuine difference, but from misunderstanding, prejudice, or disrespect. To break this vicious circle and achieve lasting peace, the international community must embrace tolerance and respect the dignity of others. In this spirit, my delegation would like to emphasize 3 points. First, tolerance is not about simply tolerating the existence of others, but it requires an active acknowledgement of different values in the forms of the cultures, beliefs, traditions, and more. Embracing tolerance is easier said than done. Japan has been convening human rights dialogues with other member states for over 20 years and exchanging views on various human rights issues. It is also critical to bear in mind that the continuous effort of learning from others must not only be done between states or groups, but between individuals. Second, tolerance can be fostered through promoting individual effort to learn from others. This is best achieved through inclusive and holistic education. Japan has been actively supporting various educational programs, including an initiative in Mosul, Iraq, implemented by UNESCO. This initiative focuses on investing in youth through the development of technical and vocational skills, as well as the prevention of violent extremism. This program aims to cultivate essential cognitive and behavioral skills, such as multi-perspectivity, understanding of complexity, moral courage, and responsible online behavior. By equipping young people with these skills, the initiative not only enhances their personal development, but also contributes to building a more tolerant and peaceful society. Third, Japan believes that tolerance is about refusing any form of violence that threatens the dignity of people and paying great attention to the plight of others. In this regard, the international community must pay particular attention to those who face greater risks posed by armed conflict, such as children, women, and religious and ethnic minorities. In particular, as an advocate for women, peace, and security, Japan continues to make its utmost efforts to amplify women's voices by promoting their meaningful participation in various fields. Mr. President, Japan will continue to contribute to peace and prosperity in the international community through ensuring human dignity and tolerance. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. And I am grateful to the Special Advisor Nderitu for the comprehensive and valuable information she has provided to this Council. Combating the root causes of violence and inequality is always the best way towards building peace, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. In the face of persistent conflict and inequality, States are responsible for promoting the rule of law, for reaching sustainable ceasefire agreements, for fostering dialogue and political negotiation, and for repairing the social fabric to build tolerant, safe, and peaceful societies. For its part, the international community contributes to this same goal by issuing early warnings to prevent armed conflicts and to the timely and sustainable financing of operations on the ground, and by seeking to ensure the conditions are in place to guarantee effective and safe work for special envoys and their teams, and by facilitating the coordinated deployment of actions to combat terrorism and violent extremism. President, in the context of the issues we are discussing today, Ecuador recognizes the essential role of the operations to keep, build, and sustain peace, in particular in the following areas. Firstly, ensuring strategic communication to counter the effects of hate speech and disinformation. Secondly, promoting a culture of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, with an understanding of their interdependent and indivisible nature, in particular, the right to freedom of expression. Thirdly, mobilizing plural and inclusive dialogue to eradicate any manifestation of discrimination for reasons of politics, race, gender, religion, or ethnicity. Colleagues, Resolution 2686 examines inter alia the need to overcome obstacles which restrict the full, equal, significant, and safe participation of women and young people in all spheres of public life. It also recognizes that the economic empowerment and leadership of women is fundamental to prevent and resolve conflicts. In this regard, it is relevant to implement the provisions of Resolutions 1325 and 2250, and to support states in mainstreaming the principles of the Youth Peace and Security and Women Peace and Security agendas, and in national policies and plans of action for peace and security. I conclude by recognizing that implementing coordinated and effective actions to ensure that women recover access to educational and labor rights, guaranteeing the revitalization of civic space and the exercise of freedom of expression, and investing in education systems for peace and solidarity are all important actions to achieve the common goal of reaching tolerance, equality, and peaceful coexistence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of the Republic of Korea. Let me begin by thanking the Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General. The Resolution 2686 on tolerance reminds us of our significant responsibility to respect the human rights of all individuals and combat discrimination, hate speech, and acts of violent extremism. We take note that the resolution was adopted unanimously last year and urge all member states to genuinely implement it in a holistic manner, not selectively. In this regard, I'd like to highlight the following points. First, we must address human rights violations rooted in intolerance and discrimination based on race, gender, ethnicity, or religion, especially those targeting minorities. These are invariably linked with the conflicts, both as warning signs and significant features of conflicts, as seen in the notable cases against the Yazidis in Iraq and the Rohingya in Myanmar. Also, the recent escalation of conflicts in Darfur, Sudan, and Myanmar clearly demonstrate how intolerance based on ethnicity or religion induces vulnerabilities and violence. This calls for increased attention from the international community and enhanced engagement of the Security Council. The Republic of Korea condemns all forms of violence, discrimination, and incitement to hatred that violate human rights and fundamental freedoms of all individuals in every corner of the world under international laws. While prioritizing the freedom of expression as a crucial value, we cannot accept acts of violent extremism and hate speech that undermine the freedom of others, particularly the vulnerable. Freedom is limited only by boundaries strictly defined by international law, and it must not be misinterpreted or distorted. In this regard, the DPRK's recent claim that Pyongyang's sending of trash balloons to South Korea was North Korean people's exercise of freedom of expression is an example of a bizarre and deplorable interpretation of freedom of expression. Second, we commend the ongoing efforts of UN peace operations to promote human rights, including addressing hate speech and mis and disinformation within their mandates. We strongly call for full support of the Security Council, both in mandates and resources, to further integrate these aspects into peace operations. With this, missions would better protect civic space for human rights defenders and peace builders on the ground, as well as the safety of UN peacekeepers themselves. Third, as a signatory of shared commitments on WPS, the Republic of Korea emphasized the importance to ensure that women in all diversity are safe from gender-based violence, including hate speech, and that their voices are heeded and reflected in the decision-making process. We are facing the disturbing reality that girls in Afghanistan have been out of school beyond the 6th grade for 1,000 days. This epitome of discrimination and intolerance is intolerable. As my President Yoon Suk-yeol has constantly emphasized, the Republic of Korea places the universal values such as freedom, human rights, and the rule of law at the core of our diplomacy. We are committed to standing in solidarity with the international community to safeguard and advance these crucial values. I now resume my function as President of the Council.